April the 28th, 2001, and a Russian Soyuz rocket blasts off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying a very special passenger.
The American Dennis Tito gets ready to make space history. Liftoff, and the first space tourist heads for the stars.
How do you feel, Dennis? Хорошо.
Good, he replies in Russian. The rocket powers on upwards, and before long, the wannabe cosmonaut is getting his first taste of weightlessness.
Dennis Tito was 60 in 2001. For 40 years, his whole adult life, he'd dreamt of this, ever since watching the Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin become the first man in space. Now, finally, he and 2 Russian astronauts were blasting off from Baikonur.
There was absolutely no fear. I was so excited, and so were my crewmates. We just had this attitude that, we were going on a mission. We were going to be in space, and we thought of nothing else but the success of that mission. So there was absolutely no apprehension. It was just really a good, euphoric feeling that finally the day had come.
Getting to that day had not been easy. The American Space Agency, NASA, had fought tooth and nail to stop the Californian financier from becoming the first person to pay to go into space. Dennis Tito had worked for NASA years before as a space scientist, before going into business where he made his fortune. But NASA did not want him on the International Space Station.
With NASA, there was a strong feeling that, my flight shouldn't take place. And I think it's somewhat understandable. It was the first truly private space flight. And I think they were concerned, myself being a private citizen, number one, and number two, my age at the time, and they had probably some reason to be concerned.
The Russians had fewer qualms. Dennis is reported to have paid $20 million to the Russian Space Agency, and after 8 months' rigorous training at Star City in Moscow, Dennis Tito was being launched into space, bound for the ISS. Conditions in the capsule, he recalls, were cramped.
We were literally elbow to elbow, and economy class in a airliner would be luxurious compared to the tight quarters we were in.
And then the countdown begins. Can you remember the sensations that as you blasted off into space?
It was a little surprising. When liftoff occurred, you could barely feel it, and you could not hear it. Now, when I witnessed a launch from the outside, even a mile away, there was a huge sound, but we heard nothing of that. The feeling was, at liftoff, just a slight movement. You feel a lot more, just accelerating in a car initially. As we lifted off and the fuel began to burn, the vehicle accelerated, and it kept on accelerating, and then you felt just a gradual buildup of G-forces. And then, of course, 8 minutes and 50 seconds later, you experience your last of the 3 Gs, and then 0 Gs when the engine shuts down. And that is the most spectacular moment of the entire flight.
Why?
You become weightless, and there are pencils that are hung from strings in the cabin. And at orbit insertion, those pencils start to just float. And you know that you're weightless from that because you're strapped in and you don't necessarily sense the weightness completely, but you see it with the pencils. And then looking out to my right, I could see the blackness of space, I could see Earth, and the curvature of Earth. And the sight of Earth from space, particularly for the first time, was just spectacular. I cannot ever duplicate that euphoric feeling that I had at that moment. I will never experience anything like that in my life.
For 2 days, the Soyuz capsule orbited the Earth far below before finally docking with the International Space Station.
There were 3 crew members, 2 Americans and 1 Russian, who were on the station for about 2 months as part of the long-term crew. They don't see many human beings, and they welcomed us with open arms. That was a great experience.
And what are the main images that stay with you from the days that you spent on the International Space Station?
Well, it's really colored inside because you have no sense of up or down. So you have a ceiling that's white, you have walls that are yellow, and you have a floor that is a brown tan color. So you get used to that as your orientation. And the porthole that we would actually look out at the Earth was through the floor. So it was always looking at Earth. Then we had some portholes that looked out to the side, and then we could look out and see the edges of the Earth or the limb of the Earth. So we had 2 different kind of views that we would go from one.
And Moscow was still wrangling about whether he should be there. At one point, NASA demanded compensation for what it said was lost research time because of his presence. But up in space, Dennis Tito was just savoring every moment.
It was time that went very quickly, and probably the most disappointing thing for me was, after a total of 8 days in space, I had to return to Earth. I would have happily stayed up there for months.
But he couldn't. It was time to go home. Back on Earth, a smiling Dennis Tito emerged from the Soyuz space capsule to give the thumbs up sign to the waiting crowd.
It was paradise. I just came back from paradise. Great flight, great landing, soft landing. Yes.
Was it a life-changing experience, would you say? Did you look at the world, at people, at things around you differently when you came back?
Yes, I did. And it was really more within myself. And I would say that it was in part achieving a major life goal, a sense of completeness. When you achieve that, from then on, everything is a bonus. In the last 10 years, everything since then has been just extra. I think I am one of the happiest humans alive because of that.
Since 2001, 6 other space tourists have made the same journey that Dennis Tito did, one of them twice. More trips are planned, and spacecraft are being commercially developed to take paying customers into space.